Under the fading glow of an early autumn sun, the air around London felt charged in a way that couldn't be explained by weather alone. Something had shifted, though no one quite knew it yet. The streets bustled as they always did, taxis weaving between buses, pedestrians hurrying across zebra crossings, and shopkeepers calling out in clipped, cheerful tones. But somewhere beyond the noise of the city, inside the ornate gates of Kensington Palace, an image was about to be captured that would ripple through the royal family like a stone tossed into still water. It was a charity gala, the kind the British royals often attended to bolster their causes. The guests were impeccably dressed, the floral arrangements impossibly precise, the lighting carefully curated to look effortless. Photographers crowded outside the venue, lenses glinting like predator eyes waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The focus was, as always, on the expected attendees. Prince William, his wife Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and a handful of other senior royals. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until Catherine stepped out of the sleek black car. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It wasn't her dress, though it was an elegant, floor-length gown that shimmered under the flashbulbs. It wasn't her hair, perfectly swept back in a style that made her seem both regal and approachable. No, what caused the collective intake of breath among the photographers was the gleam of something at her neck. Resting just above her collarbone, catching the light in a way that almost seemed deliberate, was Princess Diana's most treasured heirloom, a piece so famous that even those indifferent to royal fashion would recognize it. It was the piece Meghan Markle had, in private circles, allegedly believed would one day be hers. In that instant, the atmosphere outside the venue changed. Camera shutters went into a frenzy, capturing the heirloom from every angle. Social media feeds would soon be flooded with close-ups, zoomed-in shots, and side-by-side comparisons to images of Diana wearing it decades earlier. The journalists who were live posting didn't even bother with subtlety. The headlines began to write themselves. Catherine honors Diana. Or was this a silent message to Meghan? The interpretations varied, but one thing was certain: this was not just a fashion choice. It was a statement. Inside the palace walls, the significance of this was not lost on anyone. Princess Diana's jewelry was not merely decorative. It carried with it the weight of her legacy, her public image, and her private struggles. This particular piece, gifted to her by a foreign dignitary during a tour in the late 1980s, had been worn on some of her most iconic and emotionally charged public appearances. It was said to have been among her personal favorites. Kept close even during her years of separation from Prince Charles. When she passed away, the fate of her jewels became an intricate matter of family tradition, personal sentiment, and, inevitably, politics. In the years since Diana's death, her sons, William and Harry, had reportedly agreed on how the pieces would be divided. While some items went directly into the royal collection, others were reserved for their future wives. There was an unspoken understanding, at least in Meghan's mind, that this particular heirloom would one day adorn her neck. Whether that belief was rooted in a real promise or just wishful thinking is something only a few people know. But when Catherine walked into that gala wearing it, whatever expectations Meghan had were shattered. The public didn't need an official statement to understand the tension. Within minutes, royal commentators were making cautious observations, noting how deliberate the choice felt. Catherine's calm, poised demeanor only fueled speculation. If she felt the weight of the moment, she didn't show it. She smiled, greeted well-wishers, and moved through the gala with the effortless grace that had become her signature. But under that polished exterior, there was a sense of control. Every step, every glance, every tilt of her head seemed designed to communicate without words. Meghan, thousands of miles away in California, would have seen the images almost instantly. In the digital age, such moments don't wait for morning papers. They arrive in push notifications, text messages, and tag posts. If the sources close to her are to be believed, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Not just because of the piece itself, but because of what it represented: a shift in perception, a possible loss of symbolic ground, and a reminder that in the royal family, power is often communicated through symbols far more effectively than speeches. For Catherine, wearing the heirloom could have been an act of remembrance for Diana. For Meghan, it was likely a message, whether intentional or not, that she was further on the outside than ever before. The emotional sting would have been sharp, especially considering her well-documented struggles to be accepted within the royal fold. In the intricate game of royal image and influence, this single act felt like a move on a chessboard that Meghan no longer had the power to play on. The British public, ever attuned to subtle royal drama, dissected the moment endlessly. Was this William's decision, quietly supporting his wife's claim to Diana's legacy? Or was it Catherine's, asserting her position as the future queen? And if so, was Meghan even considered in the decision, or had she been written out of the equation entirely? These were not idle questions. They spoke to the heart of how the monarchy manages its internal relationships while keeping a face of unity for the public. This was not just about a necklace. It was about history, ownership, and belonging. It was about the stories that royal heirlooms carry, and how those stories can be rewritten simply by choosing who wears them next. And for Meghan, it was about seeing a chapter she thought she'd be part of close without her name in it. In the days that followed, the media would pore over every detail. Diana's original wearing of the piece, its journey through the years, and the strategic implications of Catherine debuting it now, of all times. Even for those indifferent to the inner workings of the monarchy, the drama was undeniable. It was a collision of personal feelings, public image, and historical legacy, all wrapped around a piece of jewelry that had outlived its original owner, but not the battles it could ignite. And as the world would soon see, this was not the end of the story. It was only the spark. This single moment had lit a fire that would blaze through the royal narrative for weeks to come, forcing everyone, William, Harry, Catherine, and Meghan, to navigate its fallout. And in the process, it would once again prove that in the House of Windsor, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. The necklace might have been made of gold and gemstones, but in this context, it was forged into something far more potent, a weapon in a war of perception. The night of the gala had begun like so many other royal engagements, meticulously planned, tightly scheduled, and bound by a sense of formality that left no room for surprises. Outside the venue, a mix of royal enthusiasts, curious locals, and international tourists lined the barricades, craning their necks for even the smallest glimpse of a royal motorcade. The atmosphere was electric, thick with anticipation, but still routine in its structure. These events had a rhythm: arrivals, photographs, handshakes, and speeches. But within moments of Catherine stepping into view, the rhythm broke. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. The first to notice were not the fans behind the barriers, but the photographers stationed just beyond them. They had been tracking the glint of her gown under the artificial lights, focusing their long lenses, ready for the standard wide shots. Then a flash of deep gold and diamond caught the corner of their frames. One photographer, a veteran of 3 decades in the business, instinctively zoomed in. His breath caught. Without pausing to think, he began firing rapid bursts, each frame locking in on the unmistakable piece around Catherine's neck. The murmurs began instantly. A photographer nudged the man next to him, pointing at his viewfinder. Within seconds, the row of professionals erupted into a frenzy, shouting for Catherine to turn slightly, to tilt her head, to give them a clearer view. They knew what they were looking at: Diana's most beloved heirloom. It wasn't just another royal accessory. It was the piece that had graced Diana during some of the most photographed and emotionally charged moments of her life. Seeing it again in public was like watching a ghost step back into the spotlight. The crowd didn't yet understand the full significance, but they could feel the shift. A ripple of excitement moved through the onlookers, phones shot into the air, and strangers began asking each other what was happening. The older royal fans, those who remembered Diana not as a historical figure, but as a living, breathing woman, were the first to gasp aloud. One woman near the front clutched her chest, whispering to the friend beside her that she remembered exactly where she was the first time she saw Diana wear it. The younger crowd, raised in the age of viral content, didn't waste time. They were already streaming and posting, tagging the moment with words like iconic, shocking, and unexpected. Inside the venue, Catherine moved with deliberate composure. She acknowledged the cheers outside with a warm but restrained wave, her expression a masterclass in royal detachment. To the casual observer, she looked entirely at ease, but her steps were measured, the weight of the moment resting lightly, but firmly on her shoulders. Whether she intended this appearance to be a simple tribute or something more pointed, only she knew. But the effect was undeniable. The room itself seemed to shift as she entered. Conversations paused, heads turned, and every camera in the hall tilted in her direction. For the seasoned royal correspondents in attendance, the questions began forming immediately. Why now? Why this event? And why this particular piece? The gala was a high-profile affair, yes, but it was not a state banquet or an official commemoration of Diana's legacy. There was no obvious reason to choose this evening to bring out the heirloom, which meant the decision was either deeply personal, deeply strategic, or, as some would whisper later, both. From the stage, the event's host offered a polished welcome, but even his practiced delivery couldn't compete with the quiet buzz that ran through the crowd. Every glance toward Catherine became a covert study of the heirloom, every polite conversation punctuated by subtle, sideways looks. A few guests, aware of its history, exchanged murmured theories. Some saw it as a touching gesture of remembrance, a way to keep Diana's spirit alive in the family narrative. Others, more attuned to the undercurrents of royal politics, interpreted it as a carefully placed move in a game that stretched far beyond the evening's charity goals. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the stillness of a California afternoon, Meghan Markle was reportedly in the midst of a private planning meeting when her phone began to buzz. At first, it was a single notification from a UK-based news outlet she still followed. Then another. Then a cascade, text messages from friends, alerts from Royal Watcher accounts, and tag posts flooding her social media. She didn't even need to open them all. The first image she saw was enough. Catherine, smiling under the bright lights, wearing the heirloom Meghan had once imagined adorning her own neck. Those in the room with her would later say she froze for a fraction of a second before her expression hardened. It wasn't just about the necklace. It was about what it signified. In Meghan's world, appearances and symbolism carried weight far beyond aesthetics. This was no random jewelry choice. Whether intentional or not, it was a public declaration of place, of belonging, and of authority within the royal family. And if she was reading it the way many others were, it was also a reminder of her distance from that world. A distance that seemed to be growing with every passing year. Back in London, the images were already taking on a life of their own. Newsrooms scrambled to update headlines, pushing the story to the top of their homepages. Morning shows prepped segments to dissect the moment, lining up jewelers to discuss the heirloom's craftsmanship and historians to unpack its emotional history. Social media, of course, moved faster than any newsroom. Within minutes, side-by-side collages appeared, showing Diana in her prime wearing the piece alongside Catherine's current appearance. The resemblance was uncanny in some shots, the lighting and angles echoing photographs taken decades earlier. The choice of the gala itself was no small detail. The event's guest list was packed with high-profile figures from politics, philanthropy, and entertainment. This was not a quiet family gathering or a subdued commemoration, it was a stage. Every camera in the room ensured that the image would not only be captured but magnified, broadcast, and replayed across the globe. It was a calculated visibility, whether or not Catherine would ever admit it. From the balcony overlooking the main hall, photographers embedded inside the venue captured the wider scene. Catherine moving gracefully through clusters of guests, William by her side, both smiling in the measured way royals do when they're performing the duties of the crown. But the truth was, in that moment, nothing could compete with the story hanging around her neck. For some in the palace, this was a proud moment, a symbol of continuity, of Diana's memory woven into the fabric of the present monarchy. For others, it was a political earthquake waiting to be measured. The buzz didn't die down as the evening progressed. If anything, it grew. Each time Catherine moved to a new group of guests, conversations reignited. The necklace drew people in, compelled them to ask quiet questions, to share whispered observations. More than once, a guest was seen gesturing toward it before leaning closer to exchange what could only have been an opinion or theory. This wasn't just an accessory anymore. It was the unspoken centerpiece of the night. By the time the gala speeches concluded and the royals prepared to leave, the coverage was already cemented. Clips of Catherine stepping into the venue were spliced with archival footage of Diana, creating a narrative that was as emotional as it was political. And as the car pulled away, Catherine sitting beside William, the heirloom glinting in the dim interior light, the world knew this was a moment that would not fade with the news cycle. It would echo. And far away, in Meghan's private California world, the echo would land like a hammer. This was not just Catherine wearing a necklace. This was a message. And Meghan would have to decide how, if at all, she would answer it. Long before the cameras captured Catherine's poised entrance into that gala, long before Meghan Markle's phone lit up with images that would ignite a storm, this heirloom had already lived a life of its own. Its story began decades ago, not in the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, but in a moment of diplomatic charm thousands of miles away, where Princess Diana was fulfilling her role as the most captivating royal ambassador Britain had ever seen. It was the late 1980s, a time when Diana was not just a member of the royal family, but an international phenomenon. The world followed her every move, her fashion, her gestures, even the tilt of her head. She had an uncanny ability to turn state visits into deeply human moments. During one such tour, in a lavish reception hall heavy with the scent of exotic flowers and perfumed air, she was presented with a gift from a foreign dignitary. It was not a casual token. It was a piece crafted by one of the world's most skilled jewelers, designed to convey both respect and admiration. The moment she opened the velvet box, those present recalled her eyes widening ever so slightly, the way they often did when she was genuinely moved. The heirloom was breathtaking. Its design blended elegance with a subtle boldness, a deep, rich sapphire at its center, encircled by flawless diamonds, suspended on a gold chain that seemed to drink in the light. It was a piece that did not merely adorn the wearer but commanded attention without overpowering her. Diana, who understood symbolism better than most, knew immediately that this was no ordinary necklace. Jewelry, in the royal sphere, is never just decoration. Every piece carries layers of meaning: the giver's intent, the craftsmanship's origin, the political relationship it might represent, and the personal stories it would eventually absorb. From the moment it was clasped around her neck, the heirloom became one of her favorites. She wore it to select, significant events, moments where she wanted to send a subtle signal of elegance, strength, and presence. Photographers noticed it instantly. Magazines often highlighted it in coverage, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was worn by her. Diana had a way of making anything she wore more than just an accessory. She infused it with emotion. When she wore this piece, it was often paired with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as though it reminded her of both the privileges and the pressures that came with her position. Its appearances in public were rare but unforgettable. One of the most iconic instances was at a charity ball where Diana arrived wearing a simple, form-fitting gown, allowing the heirloom to become the focal point of her look. The cameras couldn't get enough of it. The image made the front page of nearly every British paper the next morning, not just for the style, but for the subtle message it seemed to convey, that Diana, even in the midst of personal turmoil, could still command the spotlight with quiet authority. Behind palace doors, the heirloom was spoken of with a certain reverence. It was understood among the royal staff that this was one of Diana's deeply personal treasures, not just another item in the vaults. It was stored separately, cared for meticulously, and only handled by a select few. Diana herself was known to run her fingers along the sapphire when she was deep in thought, as though the cool, smooth surface grounded her in moments of uncertainty. Those close to her suggested it became a sort of talisman, not magical, but deeply personal, a reminder of her own strength and the image she had carefully cultivated for the world. After Diana's tragic passing in 1997, the question of her jewelry became an emotional and logistical challenge. The royal family operates under a mix of tradition, legal protocol, and private agreements when it comes to inheritance. Many of her pieces were technically part of the royal collection, meaning they would revert to the crown. But others, like this heirloom, were considered her personal property. These were the items that had been promised, in spirit if not in official documents, to her sons. The understanding was that William and Harry would one day decide how to divide them, perhaps gifting them to their future wives as symbols of continuity and remembrance. The heirloom, however, was a special case. Some within the palace believed it would naturally go to William's wife, given his position as future king. Others thought Harry, as the younger son, should inherit certain key pieces to ensure that Diana's legacy was shared equally between them. In the years that followed, the necklace was kept in secure storage, emerging only on rare occasions when it was brought out for appraisal, cleaning, or the quiet contemplation of the two brothers. By the time Meghan entered the royal picture, much of Diana's jewelry had already found its way into either Catherine's possession or remained under royal custody. Meghan had been given pieces too, notably Diana's aquamarine ring and certain earrings, but the sapphire and diamond heirloom had never been publicly linked to her. Still, those close to her say she held an expectation, whether from private conversations with Harry or her own interpretation of royal tradition, that the necklace might one day be hers. The reasoning was simple in her mind. It was not yet in circulation. It had a symbolic connection to her role as Harry's wife, and it could be a bridge between her and the public, much as it had been for Diana. Catherine, for her part, had built her own relationship with Diana's legacy. She had worn the late princess's engagement ring from the moment William proposed, a decision that carried enormous symbolic weight. Over the years, she had honored Diana through carefully chosen wardrobe tributes, subtle nods in public appearances, and the occasional wearing of Diana's jewelry. But this necklace, this heirloom, had remained out of sight, resting quietly in the vaults like a sleeping giant in the world of royal symbolism. Its reemergence at the gala was therefore not just a fashion choice. It was the moment the past and present collided. The heirloom's origin, rooted in diplomatic gifting and personal significance to Diana, gave it a gravity that went beyond sparkle and metal. It was tied to one of the most beloved figures in modern royal history, a woman whose influence still shapes the monarchy today. Every time it appeared in public, it carried with it the echoes of Diana's voice, her struggles, and her charisma. For the British public, the sight of it on Catherine's neck was more than nostalgic. It was a reminder of the monarchy's ability to connect the past to the present in ways that feel deeply personal to the people who follow it. For Meghan, it was a reminder of distance, not just geographic, but emotional and institutional. The piece she might have seen as a potential link to Diana's legacy was now firmly associated with Catherine, and in the public mind, that association would be hard, if not impossible, to change. The heirloom's journey from a diplomatic gift in the late 1980s to the centerpiece of a modern royal controversy is a story layered with meaning. It's a story about love and loss, about the politics of inheritance, and about the ways in which symbols can outlast the people who first gave them meaning. And now, after years of silence, its appearance had set the stage for a new chapter, one that would play out not in private, but in the full glare of the public eye. When Catherine clasped it around her neck before the gala, she wasn't just fastening a piece of jewelry. She was fastening decades of history, public sentiment, and private expectation into place. And once it was seen, there would be no undoing the statement it made. In the world of the British monarchy, there are rules everyone can see, written in centuries-old protocols and etiquette guides. But there are also the rules that are never written down. The ones everyone inside the palace understands, but will never speak of openly. Among these unspoken rules lies a particularly sensitive area, the inheritance of personal items, especially jewelry with deep emotional and historical weight. And in the case of Diana's most treasured heirloom, this silent understanding would eventually become the source of a quiet but undeniable rift. The agreement was never recorded in an official document, nor was it discussed in front of palace aides who might later leak its details. It lived in conversations between two brothers still grieving the loss of their mother. In the late 1990s, after Diana's possessions had been cataloged and stored, William and Harry were given the opportunity to choose keepsakes. The arrangement, according to insiders, was simple in sentiment if not in execution. Diana's jewelry would one day be worn by their future wives, ensuring that her memory lived on in the public eye. At that time, neither brother could have predicted the complexities that would come with such a promise. William, the heir, was always expected to inherit the lion's share of items associated with royal duty, while Harry, the spare, would inherit pieces of personal significance that could serve as connections to his mother's legacy outside the official royal sphere. The understanding between them was that neither would block the other from honoring Diana's memory, but the practical division of specific pieces was never firmly settled. The sapphire and diamond heirloom occupied a particularly murky place in this arrangement. It was undeniably one of Diana's favorites, but unlike her engagement ring, it wasn't universally assumed to be destined for William's wife. Some close to the family have suggested that Harry once expressed an interest in it, though whether this was a formal claim or a passing remark remains unclear. Others believe William made it known early on that the piece would eventually belong to Catherine. When Meghan entered the royal fold, she stepped into a world where the division of Diana's jewelry was not just about sentiment. It was about visibility. Wearing one of Diana's beloved pieces could soften public perception, anchor a newcomer to the family's history, and signal acceptance. Meghan did receive some of Diana's pieces, including the aquamarine ring she famously wore to her wedding reception and a pair of butterfly earrings she donned during her first official overseas tour. Yet, the heirloom in question remained unseen, locked away in the royal vaults. In private, Meghan is said to have harbored hopes that it might one day be loaned or given to her, not only as a personal tribute, but as a public bridge between her and Diana's admirers. The logic was sound from her perspective. She was Harry's wife, and Harry had been as much a son to Diana as William. If the agreement between the brothers was indeed that their wives would share in Diana's legacy, then surely such an iconic piece could be worn by either woman. But within the palace, the rules were shifting. By the time Meghan married into the family, Catherine had already been a royal for nearly a decade. She had navigated the protocols, endured the press scrutiny, and built a carefully curated image as the poised, dependable future queen. For many in the institution, this status came with unspoken privileges that extended to the wearing of certain heirlooms. There was a hierarchy, and while it was never openly stated, it was enforced through choices like which jewels were made available to whom. The unspoken agreement, once built on shared grief and brotherly trust, had evolved into something more political. Harry's departure from royal duties with Meghan in 2020 further complicated matters. Even if Meghan had once been a candidate to wear the heirloom, stepping back from the institution likely closed that possibility in the eyes of palace decision-makers. From their perspective, the optics of loaning such a historic piece to someone no longer representing the crown would have been problematic. For Meghan, however, the calculus was different. The decision not to offer her the heirloom was not simply a matter of protocol. It was a rejection. In her view, it symbolized a withdrawal of acceptance, a reminder that some parts of the royal family's history and legacy were off-limits to her. It may not have been articulated in words, but actions, or the lack thereof, spoke volumes. Catherine, meanwhile, understood the gravity of wearing the heirloom. She had waited years before unveiling it, and the timing was no accident. Every royal appearance is planned with layers of consideration. The event's audience, the charitable cause, the political climate, and, in this case, the familial dynamics. By debuting the necklace at a high-profile gala, Catherine was placing it firmly in her public narrative. Once the world saw her wearing it, the association between her and the heirloom would be cemented. Some royal watchers have speculated that Catherine's choice to wear it was not meant as an act of exclusion toward Meghan, but rather as a natural continuation of her role as the senior royal wife. Still, others believe it was a subtle yet deliberate reinforcement of her place in the hierarchy, a message that Diana's legacy was most secure in her hands, not Meghan's. The beauty of unspoken agreements is that they can be interpreted in countless ways, and the palace rarely confirms or denies any of them. In the end, the so-called agreement between William and Harry was less a contract and more a fragile understanding, vulnerable to the shifting tides of relationships and public roles. What might have been a shared inheritance in the abstract became a dividing line in reality. The heirloom's journey from the vault to Catherine's neck was paved with decisions that, while silent, spoke directly to where each woman stood in the evolving narrative of the royal family. And when the photographs from the gala flashed across screens worldwide, whatever private understanding had once existed was effectively rewritten. The unspoken agreement had found its conclusion, not in words, but in an image that would be impossible to undo. For Catherine, the decision to wear the heirloom was not made in the spur of the moment. It was the culmination of years of calculated patience, of waiting for the right moment to bring it into the public eye. The choice of jewelry for a royal appearance is never arbitrary. Every piece worn, from the smallest brooch to the most dazzling tiara, passes through a subtle but deliberate process. Considerations range from historical appropriateness to political undertones, and in Catherine's world, there is no such thing as just a necklace. Behind palace walls, the heirloom had rested in a velvet-lined case for decades, brought out only for occasional inspections or to be admired in private. Catherine had known of its existence long before it ever touched her skin. In her early years as the Duchess of Cambridge, she was introduced to many of Diana's pieces, each carrying its own history. She was measured in her approach, never overreaching, never appearing as if she were claiming too much of Diana's legacy too soon. Instead, she built her image slowly, using smaller tributes. Wearing Diana's engagement ring daily, selecting earrings for events that subtly mirrored her late mother-in-law's style, and choosing gowns that echoed Diana's elegance without copying her outright. This gradual alignment with Diana's memory created a visual and emotional bridge between Catherine and the public. Royal watchers noticed the care she took with these tributes. She never appeared to be using Diana's image for personal gain. Instead, it seemed as though she was honoring her quietly, without theatrics. Over time, this sincerity earned her a kind of trust that even the most beloved royals struggle to maintain. The heirloom's absence from Catherine's public appearances was not due to a lack of opportunity, but a deliberate choice. Timing in the royal family is as much about optics as it is about personal readiness. Wearing it too early in her marriage might have appeared presumptuous. Wearing it in the midst of heightened tensions with Meghan could have seemed confrontational. But in the months leading up to the gala, circumstances began to align. Public opinion toward Catherine was strong. She had navigated recent royal events with composure and had even weathered subtle criticisms without losing her footing. The gala, with its mix of prestige, charitable focus, and high visibility, was the perfect stage. In preparation for the event, Catherine's team worked closely with stylists and palace aides. They understood the significance of the decision. Photographers would zero in on the necklace, media outlets would analyze its meaning, and inevitably, the choice would be contrasted with Meghan's position outside the royal fold. Still, the final decision rested with Catherine. It was she who approved the pairing of the heirloom with the gown, a gown whose neckline had been subtly adjusted to frame the necklace in precisely the right way. When the night came, Catherine's movements reflected not only her usual poise, but also the weight of what she was wearing. She didn't fidget with the necklace or draw attention to it deliberately, yet she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what message she was sending. The necklace did not overshadow her. Instead, it became an extension of her, as if the piece had been waiting for her all along. For those inside the palace who had witnessed her journey, the moment was both inevitable and deeply symbolic. This was not an impulsive grab for attention. It was the careful claiming of a role she had been stepping into for over a decade. By wearing the heirloom, Catherine was not simply accessorizing. She was cementing her place as the custodian of Diana's public legacy. Some would later speculate that the timing was also influenced by subtle undercurrents in the family's dynamic. With Meghan firmly settled in California and her ties to the institution publicly loosened, Catherine's position as the primary female face of the monarchy was unchallenged. The heirloom, once a point of potential contention, could now be worn without the risk of a direct public showdown. The debut was masterfully controlled. The palace made no official statement about the necklace, allowing the image itself to carry the narrative. Without words, Catherine had effectively claimed it. And in the realm of royal imagery, once the public associates a piece with a particular figure, that association is difficult to undo. From that night forward, the heirloom would not simply be Diana's treasured necklace. It would be the necklace Catherine wore. Meghan, watching from afar, would have seen this for what it was, a silent, irreversible shift. The possibility of her ever wearing the piece had diminished to near zero. The heirloom's reappearance had been choreographed to perfection, ensuring that its modern identity was tied to Catherine, not shared or debated. In the days following the gala, Catherine's quiet claim became the subject of endless analysis. Experts in royal protocol dissected the decision, pointing out that such an appearance often signals that the piece is now in regular rotation for the wearer. Jewelry historians reminded audiences that once a royal woman is photographed in a significant heirloom, it becomes part of her personal repertoire until she passes it to the next generation. And fashion commentators praised the seamless integration of the necklace into her look, calling it one of her most memorable style moments to date. For Catherine, the move was both personal and strategic. It honored Diana, resonated with the public, and reinforced her role within the family, all without a single word of explanation. The power of the act lay in its subtlety. Those who understood royal politics could read between the lines. Those who did not could simply appreciate the beauty of the gesture. The heirloom was no longer a relic of the past. It was alive again, reframed through Catherine's image. And in the carefully balanced world of monarchy, where symbols often speak louder than declarations, that was a victory all its own. The first photographs reached Meghan in the middle of what had been an otherwise ordinary afternoon in Montecito. She was at home, going over notes for a planned podcast appearance, the California sun casting soft golden light through the wide windows of her living room. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan and the occasional sound of Archie playing with a toy in another room. Then her phone buzzed. Once, twice, then a steady stream of notifications that seemed to have no intention of stopping. At first, she ignored them. It wasn't unusual for her phone to light up during a royal event. There were still friends, acquaintances, and journalists who would send her updates whenever something significant happened back in the UK. But when the volume of messages began to spike and her assistant's voice came from the kitchen saying, "You might want to see this," she set aside her work and picked up her phone. The first image she saw was unmistakable. Catherine stepping out of a car in a dazzling gown, her hair swept elegantly back and around her neck, Diana's most treasured sapphire and diamond heirloom. Meghan froze. For a long moment, she simply stared at the photo, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. Then she scrolled, and with every new angle, every side-by-side comparison to Diana's iconic appearances, a tight, hot knot formed in her chest. It wasn't just jealousy. It was something more complex, a collision of emotions she had fought hard to keep under control since leaving the royal family. There was disappointment, the bitter taste of a door closing that she had once believed might open for her. There was frustration, the sense that, once again, the narrative was being shaped without her having any say in it. And there was the inescapable sting of exclusion, the realization that the institution had made its choice about who would carry Diana's most visible legacy, and it wasn't her. According to someone close to her, Meghan didn't lash out immediately. She didn't throw the phone or shout. Instead, she went silent, her eyes fixed on the images as if staring long enough might somehow change what she was seeing. But the silence was heavy, charged. When Harry walked into the room a few minutes later, she was still scrolling through the coverage. He took one look at her expression and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. She turned the phone toward him without saying a word. Harry's face darkened almost instantly. He knew the heirloom well, had seen it in storage, had heard their mother's stories about it, had even once mentioned it to Meghan in the early days of their relationship as one of the pieces she might one day wear. Harry sat down beside her, glancing between the phone and her face. "You knew this was going to happen eventually," he said softly, but the words did little to ease the sting. Meghan gave a small, humorless laugh. "Eventually," she replied, "but not like this. Not as a headline, not as a surprise, and certainly not without so much as a word to us." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of incoming news alerts and social media posts. Within hours, hashtags like #PrincessDianaTribute and #CatherineNecklace were trending worldwide. Television commentators praised Catherine for her elegance and for honoring Diana's legacy. Public sentiment, at least in the UK, was overwhelmingly positive. But sprinkled among the admiration were pointed remarks that stung Meghan. "This is who should have Diana's jewels," one tweet read. "She's the real keeper of the legacy." Others were even harsher, framing the necklace's debut as proof that Meghan had been permanently sidelined from royal history. By evening, the frustration Meghan had tried to keep in check began to boil over. She spoke quickly, pacing the room, recounting every instance in which she felt the palace had made decisions that undermined her. The necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry to her. It was a symbol of the choices the institution had made from the beginning. Choices that seemed to consistently favor Catherine, that seemed to erase Meghan's role as Diana's daughter-in-law, that seemed to say she had never truly belonged. Harry tried to calm her, reminding her of their life in California, their freedom from royal obligations, their new ventures. But even he couldn't entirely mask his own discomfort. He knew how much Diana's memory meant to Meghan, and he couldn't ignore the fact that Catherine's public claim on the heirloom would reshape the narrative in ways that left Meghan on the margins. Behind the scenes, friends of the couple reached out, offering sympathy and, in some cases, fueling the fire. Some suggested the move had been deliberate, timed to coincide with certain projects Meghan had in the works, ensuring that Catherine would dominate the news cycle. Others speculated it was a quiet but calculated message from the palace, that Catherine was the central figure in Diana's public legacy, and Meghan was no longer part of that conversation. Whether or not any of this was true didn't matter in the moment. What mattered was how it felt. And for Meghan, it felt like yet another instance of being written out of a story she had once believed she could help shape. That night, she barely touched her dinner. Instead, she sat on the couch with her laptop, reading articles and watching coverage from British morning shows. One segment in particular caught her attention, a panel of royal commentators discussing the heirloom's reappearance. "This is significant," one said. "We've known for years this piece existed, but to see Catherine wearing it now, in such a public setting, firmly establishes her as the custodian of Diana's most precious items." Another added, "It's hard to imagine anyone else wearing it now. The public will forever associate it with Catherine." Meghan closed the laptop. She didn't need to hear more. The breaking point wasn't just the necklace. It was the finality of it, the knowledge that this was one battle she could never win. In the world of royal symbolism, once an image is established, it's nearly impossible to undo. Catherine's debut in the heirloom had locked her into that role for decades to come. For Meghan, it wasn't just about losing access to a piece of jewelry. It was about losing a link to Diana's public image, a link that might have helped bridge the gap between her and a British public that had grown increasingly critical of her. Without it, she felt even more distant from the royal family, not just physically, but in the eyes of the world. That night, long after Harry had gone to bed, Meghan remained awake, staring out the window at the quiet Montecito streets. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of the ocean, but her thoughts were thousands of miles away, in a palace she no longer called home, circling around a necklace she would likely never touch. The morning after the gala, London was buzzing, but it wasn't just the city's newspapers that were ablaze with the image of Catherine in the sapphire and diamond heirloom. It was every corner of the internet. Social media had become the arena where royal narratives were no longer controlled solely by official press releases. This was a battlefield of opinions, theories, and emotional reactions, and the necklace had become the spark for an online inferno. On Twitter, now known as X, the first wave of posts came from royal watchers who had been live-streaming the event. They posted high-definition stills, looping clips, and captions dripping with excitement. "She's channeling Diana tonight," one account declared, tagging the official Kensington Palace page. Another wrote, "Catherine is the true heir to Diana's grace and legacy." The hashtags #Princess Diana, #Princess of Wales, and #Royal Elegance began climbing the trending charts within hours. Instagram was no different. Fashion bloggers uploaded side-by-side carousels comparing Catherine's appearance with Diana's most famous moments in the necklace. Influencer-style captions accompanied these posts, praising Catherine's restraint in waiting so long to debut the piece and applauding her sense of occasion. "This is how you honor a legacy," one caption read, followed by a crown emoji. But not all the commentary was celebratory. The moment had its critics, and they were just as vocal. Meghan's supporters took to their platforms, framing the debut as a calculated snub. On TikTok, creators stitched footage of Catherine at the gala with older clips of Meghan speaking about Diana in interviews. Some videos speculated that the necklace had originally been promised to Harry, with captions like, "She was supposed to wear it. What happened?" These videos racked up millions of views in hours, feeding a narrative that this was yet another instance of Meghan being sidelined. YouTube became home to long-form dissections of the event. Popular royal commentary channels broke down every frame of Catherine's entrance, the angle of the photographers, and the way the palace's social media accounts rolled out the images. Some channels praised the elegance of the moment, calling it one of Catherine's most defining appearances. Others questioned the timing, hinting at possible ulterior motives. Why now was the recurring theme. Why this event? Why this exact moment to bring the necklace out of the vaults? By midday in the UK, the global reaction was impossible to ignore. American talk shows picked up the story, offering their own commentary. In the US, the conversation skewed differently. While many admired Catherine's style, there was a stronger undercurrent of sympathy for Meghan, with hosts openly asking whether she had been deliberately excluded from such a significant piece of Diana's legacy. One daytime panel even staged a debate, with one guest arguing that the palace was making a clear statement about who it saw as the rightful torchbearer of Diana's public image. Meanwhile, in private group chats among royal insiders, the conversation was more blunt. Several commentators who normally kept their criticism to themselves admitted that the optics were impossible to ignore. The heirloom had been dormant for decades, and its sudden reappearance in Catherine's possession, without so much as a nod to Harry or Meghan, was a choice that would reverberate for years. On Meghan's side of the Atlantic, the notifications were relentless. Friends forwarded tweets, sent screenshots of Instagram posts, and tagged her in TikToks. Even people she hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some offering sympathy, others asking pointedly, "Did you know this was going to happen?" Meghan responded to few of them, but her silence online did not stop others from speaking on her behalf. Several prominent voices aligned with her publicly suggested that the decision had been disrespectful, with one even calling it a quiet act of erasure. In the UK, the tabloids seized on the online firestorm. They ran headlines like "Necklace Sparks Social Media War" and "Fans Divided Over Diana Tribute," quoting tweets from both sides to fuel the drama. The coverage was carefully balanced to appear neutral, but the choice of quotes often leaned toward painting Catherine as the dignified figure in the center of a storm she hadn't asked for, and Meghan as the outsider, watching from afar. The algorithms did their part in fanning the flames. Anyone who engaged with one post about the heirloom was soon flooded with more. Videos, commentary, old photos of Diana, op-eds about royal inheritance, and side-by-side comparisons of Catherine and Meghan in their most memorable jewelry moments. The cycle was self-perpetuating, with each share, like, and comment feeding the fire. By the second day, the online discussion had grown more speculative. Some users claimed to have insider information about the heirloom's history, suggesting it had been earmarked for Catherine from the start. Others swore they had heard Meghan herself mention the piece in past conversations or interviews, though no concrete evidence surfaced. A few fringe accounts even floated conspiracy theories that the necklace had been withheld from Meghan as a form of silent punishment after her and Harry's public criticisms of the institution. The memes began on day 3. Some were harmless, playful jabs at royal fashion politics, while others were sharper, portraying the gala appearance as a deliberate power move by Catherine. One widely shared image showed a chessboard with Catherine's photo replacing the queen piece and the necklace as her crown, accompanied by the caption, "Checkmate." Through it all, Catherine remained silent. The palace issued no statement, and her social media accounts posted only a few carefully selected photographs from the event, all with captions focusing on the gala's charitable cause. This silence only fueled more discussion. Was it dignified restraint, or was it calculated avoidance? The absence of commentary meant that the public was left to interpret the moment however they wished. For Meghan, the digital onslaught was inescapable. Even if she avoided her phone, the story was everywhere, on television screens in public places, on the lips of talk show hosts, in casual conversations overheard at cafes. The narrative was running without her, shaped by voices she couldn't control. And in the age of social media, once a narrative takes hold, it's nearly impossible to reclaim it. The firestorm was no longer just about a necklace. It had become a proxy war for larger conversations. Tradition versus modernity, insiders versus outsiders, and the ongoing question of who truly carries Diana's legacy in the 21st century. Each camp believed its side was right, and neither was willing to back down. As the week drew on, it became clear that this was not a fleeting story. The image of Catherine in the heirloom had embedded itself into the public consciousness. And in the court of social media, where perception often outweighs reality, Meghan had little recourse but to watch the storm play out, knowing that every repost and retweet was solidifying a legacy that no longer included her. For Prince Harry, the controversy over the necklace was more than just a public relations headache. It was a deeply personal collision of loyalties. The gala itself had been a formal, polished event an ocean away, but its consequences reached directly into his home in California. It wasn't the first time Harry found himself caught between his wife and his brother's wife, but this time was different. This time, the wedge between them was a physical object, a sapphire and diamond heirloom once worn by his mother, now the centerpiece of a story neither he nor Meghan could control. When the first photos surfaced, Harry had recognized the necklace instantly. He didn't need anyone to explain its history or significance. He had been there when it was removed from the vault years earlier, and he remembered his mother's connection to it vividly. As a boy, he had seen her wear it on rare occasions, each time carrying herself with the kind of poise that made her presence unforgettable. To him, it wasn't just jewelry. It was a fragment of memory, a link to a time when his mother was still alive, when the family felt whole. Now, that fragment had been reintroduced into the public eye under circumstances that made him uneasy. On one hand, he understood why Catherine would wear it. She was the Princess of Wales, the wife of the future king, and as such, she was naturally positioned to inherit and showcase significant pieces from Diana's collection. On the other hand, Harry couldn't ignore the sting of seeing something so personal to his mother become a flashpoint in the ongoing tension between his wife and the rest of his family. The day after the gala, Harry found himself walking through the garden of his Montecito home, phone in hand, reading through a mix of headlines, opinion pieces, and social media posts. Every narrative seemed to pull him in a different direction. British media outlets praised Catherine's choice as a masterstroke of symbolism, framing it as a dignified tribute to Diana. American coverage was more divided, with some outlets openly questioning whether the move was meant to edge Meghan out of Diana's legacy altogether. Harry didn't know which narrative to believe. He had spoken to William only sparingly over the past year, their relationship strained but not entirely severed. In their few conversations, they'd avoided topics likely to spark conflict, and certainly hadn't discussed Diana's jewelry. That silence now felt glaring. Was Catherine's decision to wear the heirloom a simple act of remembrance, or was it part of a broader message, intentional or not, about where Meghan stood in the royal hierarchy? Meghan's reaction had been immediate and intense, and Harry had felt the full force of it in their conversations. She had tried to explain, in her own way, that this was about more than a necklace. It was about what it represented, the doors that had been closed to her, the unspoken rules that seemed to shift in Catherine's favor, and the ongoing sense that she had been written out of certain chapters of the family story. Harry had listened, trying to reassure her, but deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong about the symbolism. Yet he also knew his brother and sister-in-law weren't likely to see it that way. William would have approached the matter from a perspective of duty and tradition, not personal slight. Catherine, meticulous in her public image, would have ensured the moment was executed flawlessly, without any overt aggression toward Meghan. But the truth was, in the royal family, perception often mattered more than intent, and the perception here was combustible. Over the next few days, Harry received messages from friends on both sides of the Atlantic. Some encouraged him to let it go, arguing that the piece rightfully belonged to Catherine by virtue of her position. Others hinted that he should make a statement, even if indirectly, to acknowledge Meghan's feelings and to remind the public of his own connection to his mother's legacy. Harry resisted both impulses. Publicly, he stayed silent. Privately, he tried to hold the line between understanding Meghan's hurt and avoiding another public feud with